It's not often that I get to talk about stories from my own state in my usual material, but that's a lot of what makes Montana such a great place to live. We don't make national news. Outside of watching Yellowstone or some Unabomber documentary, nobody really thinks about us. For 99% of the country, we are an afterthought, if we're ever even a thought at all. And we like to keep it that way so that the rest of you remain under the impression that it sucks here and you leave us alone and free from your coastal influence. But I suppose the fact that we love guns and hate feds in this state does put us on something of an inevitable crash course with national trends anyhow. So thankfully, this particular episode ended without incident, at least for now, but it certainly is a recipe for major conflict that could happen anywhere. Because what may appear like some small law enforcement issue on the Montana High Line actually has massive implications for our rights as citizens and the proper centers of police power between the state and federal governments, and even the role of foreign policing in our lives. In other words, do the feds own Montana, or do we, the people of this state? Because the feds don't seem properly considerate with that question. This event actually happened a few weeks ago. I'm returning to this story because this week there are some new developments, or maybe non-developments, in terms of people refusing to explain what even happened here. But back on September 24th, there was a gun show at the Cascade County Fairgrounds in Great Falls, Montana. This is about 120 miles straight south on Interstate 15 from the Canadian border crossing at Coots. And at some point during the event, attendees noticed a suspicious blacked-out SUV patrolling the parking lot, and the driver taking photos of other cars. This SUV had Canadian license plates, but the man behind the wheel never actually entered the event. He just crept around the parking lot taking his photos. And so the fairgrounds director, unsure who this guy is or what he's doing, called the sheriff's department. A deputy responded and spoke with the man, who identified himself as Richard Carina, a Canadian police officer with the Lethbridge, Alberta Police Department. Okay, so why is an Albertan municipal police officer conducting some kind of surveillance op in the U.S. 200 miles away from his city? Well, he said he's working with a Royal Canadian Mounted Police Task Force. In other words, he's with the Mounties, the Canadian feds. Okay, so why is a Canadian fed conducting a surveillance op on U.S. soil then? Why isn't he working with the police of jurisdiction, the Cascade County Sheriff's Office? Well, he is working with American law enforcement, he says, speaking with the sheriff. An ATF agent named Craig Howe, who was also on the fairgrounds, though not in the car with Carina the Mountie at the time. According to the Mountie, speaking with the sheriff, this operation was searching for Canadians smuggling guns back to Canada. But that's not necessarily why his ATF partner was there. When the sheriff asked Howe, the ATF agent, what was going on, the ATF agent said he was looking for an American selling guns without proper federal licensure. It's a notably different reason for the investigation than the Mountie provided. Now, of course, it's possible that both of these things were happening, that somebody did smuggle guns into Canada and somebody did sell guns without proper licensure, but that's an explanation still lacking specifics. If the ATF agent and the Mountie are working on two different cases, then what is the nature of the cooperation? If these are related cases, then who are they looking for, and what did this suspect do? But notably, in both news coverage and the sheriff's report, no such specifics are provided. No mention of who is doing this. No mention of what guns were exchanged, just the conduct of a Mountie that sure looks like he's investigating people at the gun show in general, not looking for a specific target who committed a specific crime. And even if there was a legitimate crime committed, the question remains, why wasn't the sheriff ever informed or even contacted about this operation? Because without informing the sheriff, this sure looks an awful lot like an international Fed op to spy on American citizens exercising their constitutional rights without any cooperation from the local law enforcement that is actually elected by and accountable to that community. Without a legitimate basis for the investigation, Sheriff Jesse Slaughter told the Mountie and the ATF agent that their spy op was over. The ATF agent responded that because he's a Fed, he doesn't have to tell the sheriff anything about this operation, but at least he and the Mountie then did the most honest thing they'd done all day. they left, but not without massive implications to consider and questions that still remain unanswered. Most obviously, even without the Mountie there, we still have significant constitutional issues. The ATF monitoring Americans exercising their constitutional rights to assembly and to arms, activities in which the feds are generally expressly constitutionally prohibited from intervention. And sure, crimes can still be committed in these contexts, crimes that might be ongoing and in need of monitoring, but who holds the constitutional authority to monitor them? Police powers are reserved to the states where they are not constitutionally delegated to the federal government. And in this case, it's not just that they aren't delegated, it's that the feds are prohibited from this arena. But add to those concerns the issue of national sovereignty. Why is a Canadian police officer conducting an investigation in the U.S. alone without direct oversight from American law enforcement with jurisdiction? As the sheriff says the fair director and his deputies observed, this Mountie was doing his snooping alone, not in the ATF agent's presence. Because it's bad enough to have our own federal agents creeping on our constitutional rights, but why are our federal agents allowing foreign federal agents to do that creeping according to their own terms without our oversight or involvement? That is a national security issue. And it's a personal security issue too. Notably, this Mountie was undercover. He was in plain clothes, and his vehicle, though blacked out, was not marked as a police car. Not identifying himself creates confusion for this community. Who is this guy? Why is he creeping? And that suspicion creates conflict potential, especially in a situation in which everyone is armed. Here's the sheriff explaining.
What type of public safety issue do we have if we end up with a use of force situation during the gun show?
With hundreds of people with guns, yeah.
Well, we could have had citizens pointing guns at law enforcement pointing guns at citizens that weren't involved, and then we wouldn't have known about it. So we could have had law enforcement officers pointing guns at each other. Unbeknownst to them, we had multiple on and off duty deputies in that building. What kind of horrible conflict could we have had?
The sheriff says had he at least known of the operation, whether he agrees with its legitimacy or not, he could have informed his deputies not to overreact to this Mountie or the ATF agent, thus reducing the likelihood of danger instead of putting guesswork on everybody in a potentially deadly situation. And of course, if that situation does get deadly, well, now it's not just a problem in Great Falls, or just a problem in Montana, or even just a problem in the United States. Now it's a potential international conflict.
And had something gone awry, and even what if we even had one of our citizens do something that what they weren't supposed to do, but all of a sudden now we have this Canadian law enforcement officer involved in it, nobody knows about it? That would have been an international incident.
Yeah.
That would have been, I mean, there's been countries that have fought wars for less.
Well, if it did come to a war for the Great White North, I'm not that worried, since Trudeau will make sure they're all fighting with maple syrup squirt guns anyway. But the sheriff's point stands. Why create all of this risk unnecessarily? Why exclude local law enforcement? Why not even tell them at all? That strategy only makes sense if the feds view the sheriff as an obstacle to their operation, and that's exactly what Sheriff Slaughter believes happened. If these feds are hostile to your constitutional rights, well, then they won't bother telling a sheriff who might go rogue and actually respect them.
I think there's a feeling out there that the state of Montana, and maybe in particular me, as a sheriff, will not be very friendly to gun control. And that's true. The state of Montana is not. Now, that doesn't mean that if the ATF, in their legal purview of their organization, I couldn't be involved in it, but they should still let me know.
And it might be tempting to think maybe the feds just don't trust this one sheriff in particular. Maybe he's a loose cannon, or he's kooky, or he's a liability in one way or another. Okay, but notably, these feds refuse to say anything to local media either. That suggests to me that it's less about this one particular sheriff or the politics of the state in general, and it's more about avoiding any sort of local accountability at all.
I don't believe this is a local agent boots on the ground thing. I think they're getting their orders from DC, and it's don't cooperate with local government, don't cooperate with local law enforcement.
Don't cooperate with local media either. Do not do interviews. I will guarantee you that's what these agents are being told on the ground in every single one of these federal agencies.
And to that point, that is The latest update in the story, nobody will say a damn thing. A month later, and still no comment from the ATF, other than their public information officer early this week telling Montana media they will not have a conversation about it. This follows Montana media attempts to get comment from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Lethbridge Police Department in Alberta. No requests for comment returned. So say what you will about Sheriff Slaughter, agree with his views, disagree with his views. He is the only one actually talking with his community about what happened. He is the only one actually talking to reporters about what happened. He is transparent. He is accountable. But of course, for those efforts, Sheriff Slaughter still gets scrutiny from many of these reporters who the feds won't even talk to, who apparently would prefer that sort of secretive, unaccountable, silent federal intrusion, so long as they agree with those abuses. Coverage in the Helena Independent Record refers to Sheriff Slaughter as a quote-unquote constitutional sheriff, describing a theory that sheriffs hold ultimate authority in their county above even federal officials, implying Slaughter and this controversial view are somehow responsible for the friction between layers of law enforcement. Oh yeah, what a lunatic. He believes in this fringe theory that the Second Amendment actually means something about protecting citizens' rights from federal intrusion. He believes in this fringe theory that the 10th Amendment actually means something when it says that the powers not delegated to the feds properly belong to the state of Montana and the people who elect him. He believes in this fringe theory that maybe the proper philosophy of law enforcement is actually upholding the oath that he swore, the oath to protect and defend the rights of the people, not bend the knee to the feds, as though his job is to do whatever the feds say and not what the people say. A plain reading of the Constitution is now viewed as bizarre kookery. And of course, the paper implies that it's the sheriff who's creating the risk too. Asked if drawing attention to the federal agents put those law enforcement officers in jeopardy, Slaughter told the reporter that their police work outed themselves. We don't know they're undercover, he said. We don't know who they are, but we have them acting suspiciously. Yet, God forbid we have one Fed put at risk by his own illegitimate intrusion into a community in which he does not belong. Burn down that expo center, so long as not one Fed gets scratched. And that may sound like an exaggeration, but it isn't. This philosophy has resulted in that exact sort of community bonfire before, and we appear intent on not just failing to learn that lesson, but saying that was actually good. This story may seem obscure, but its lesson is not. It's a very important one that applies just as crucially in Waco, Texas, as it does in Great Falls, Montana, and every other town in between. This is not about gun shows. It's not about Montana. It's not even about who's the kooky one between the sheriff and the ATF agent and the Mountie. This is about accountability in policing. Something I was told was a very important progressive value in recent years, as indicated by other community bonfires in demonstration. Crimes will be committed and arrests will be made, but by whom is the key question to think about. Do you want a local sheriff or a local police officer making those arrests? A guy you can actually go talk to yourself, a guy you can vote for or vote against, and a guy who actually cares personally about that vote, and a guy, by the way, who actually lives in your community and therefore has some sort of investment in its success or its prosperity? Or do you want some faraway intruder who cares none about your community because he doesn't even live there, who you don't get to vote for, and who, as a general rule, won't talk to you, and even if he does, will still do everything he can to remain nameless and faceless, because abuse works best by anonymity. And if you pick the obvious response to that hypothetical, congratulations, you subscribe to this kooky fringe theory that we call the Constitution and its proper distribution of power. And now you're only one step away from the final piece of tinfoil, the fact that the Constitution mentions neither the ATF nor the Royal Canadian Mounties anyway, and in that regard, I am glad and proud that they both got a proper Montana send-off. Thanks for coming. Now get the hell out. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab, that is at ML Christensen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.